is the people who are approving those investments that we were talking about, you can then say, look at this particular case that I'm asking you to invest in, and you can repeat the analysis. You don't have to trust me. You can verify for yourself. And the energy system is a system that is full of people who like to kick the tires, and that data would allow people to kick the tires on decisions. And I think that could accelerate transformation.
Welcome back to Wicked Problems. I am Richard Delavan, and I am so delighted to be joined by Alexina Jackson, an energy expert and influencer about all things related to the grid. And we're here to talk today about how the grid is going digital and what that's going to mean. Alexina, thank you so much for coming on Wicked Problems.
Thank you, Richard. Great to be here.
And look, I mean, you've had such an interesting career, and we met because you, like many of us, have been a recent migrant to Blue Sky,
right.
Which I so delighted to see, like, so much of the cool people from Energy Twitter coming over, and some others. So it's interesting to see how that dynamic is working out. First of all, thanks again for coming on, and introduce yourself, if you would, to the audience, about what does it mean to be an energy influencer, and to be talking an expert about the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, my name is Alexina Jackson. I would describe myself as someone who has been in sustainability from the start, but really this unique nexus of sustainability thinking from a business perspective and really embracing technology as a method of transforming and solving sustainability challenges, and even providing opportunities for countries that haven't had as much access to capital to leapfrog into new and modern technologies. So to make that a really vivid example, I have a lot of family still in Brazil, and I remember as a child them waiting for really long periods of time to get access to fixed line telephony. Nice. And when cell phone service came in as an option, they were able to leapfrog into that more digital form of communication. And it just got rid of a lot of that process slowdown related to getting that fixed line in place. So that's a really good sort of anecdote for how I see myself, not just as someone who's thought a lot about sustainability, a lot about technology, applied diverse skill sets like even my legal career to those challenges, but have embraced and leaned in on tech as a solution. So as applied to the energy space, which I think for many who might be listening to your work are passionate about climate change, this technology and sustainability nexus really leaned into that digital transformation for the energy system as well. So that's the why behind my evangelism or my excitement or my passion, my desire to get others energized, pun intended, about energy and the digital grid itself.
I think you touched on it briefly, but maybe go a little bit deeper on this. So you started out with working in things with telecoms. You had a legal career before then, working for a major company in the US in the energy space. So can you just give us just a little bit more on that? Sure. For me, that's such an interesting trajectory. And again, like that, and now that metaphor, that why that story speaks to you about leapfrog, about the technology leaps. Again, for me, what I found super interesting, and again, I confess, because it's partly my own background of having spent some time working in telecoms in the 90s, and being up close to see how the digital transition happened and those things, and seeing all these obvious parallels, which if you've never worked in telecoms, maybe they're just not obvious, but you have. So tell us.
Yeah. So I did start my career as a strategy consultant, and I had that opportunity to look at strategic industry development. Some of that industry was energy. So even from my early days out of undergrad, I was thinking about hydropower and energy as a transformative system for economies. But then I also had that opportunity for working in telecoms, and very specifically in the convergence of analog systems into digital methods of both technologically transmitting, but also thinking about the business structure. So how are we thinking about packetizing data streams and building payment systems around that? So I'm sure you remember paying however many sort of dollars for so many gigabytes. That was some of the thinking that I was doing early on in trying to build that market, open that market for the digital transformation. So yeah, for sure, having that in the back of my mind as I went through my career, and particularly took up energy as a really important area for transformation and thinking within our global economy.
Yeah.
I went back and remembered those early lessons learned about the value of a digital system for efficiency, right? The value of a digital system for security, for enabling, back to that idea of sustainability and leapfrogging, for enabling people who didn't have that early investment cycle and sort of what's called the analog industrialization cycle, right? They didn't have that infrastructure in place. And so instead of being burdened by the albatross of the infrastructure in place, they were able to go smart from the beginning.
Right.
And so that early lesson learned as a strategy consultant was formative. You did ask me, though, after that, where did I go? And I did go and do a legal career, not uncommon for people who start in consulting to go and get an advanced degree. And I thought that instead of going back to a business school environment, since I had a lot of exposure to that in undergrad, I was going to go and fill in a gap. So that's another thing about my career. And, if there's anyone listening to the podcast here who's thinking about their own career progression, I'm a big fan of that concept of building range, right? So referencing the book Range, building that range in your own mental models so that as you tackle a big, wicked problem, to reference your own podcast title, right, as you are tackling those big problems, you can pull from a variety of skill sets, a variety of mental models, problem-solving techniques. And so legal area, regulatory environment, which is so influential in the energy space, was something that I thought, okay, I need to get smarter on that so that I can enter into the dialogue and problem solving with a robust tool set of problem solving methods. So that's my sort of educational career. And then just to round it out, leaned in, to innovation and, sort of the technical side even of energy so that I could speak the language on both the innovation space that I was in, but also the really technical aspects that make up our energy system and build that credibility.
And one of the things that I read that you posted was actually a white paper about smarter use of the dynamic grid, which again, I think was a really great layperson friendly for bears a small brain like myself to be able to actually, digest without being several PhDs in about like the significance of some of these things. You talk a lot about grid enhancing technologies. And you've been, I think, with AES for the last few years where this has informed some of that work. But I think your work is more about, the possibility at the edge of what's going to be happening, and therefore having a vision of how some of these things might come about and what are the steps that we need to go through to get there. So maybe could you give us a little bit about this kind of big picture about this shift, analog to, I think you call it dynamic, data-driven, and distributed. I've got that wrong from my memory, but I think in terms of like why that's such a big deal, and particularly for an industry that's not known for being early adopters on a lot of things, energy's by its nature correctly conservative, because if you keep the lights don't stay on, that's a problem. So wanting to make sure that you do all the things, 9 nines reliability or 5 nines reliability, kind of get that, but it's been a bit of a journey. So you've been there for a decade or more as part of this journey. So tell me about that. Let's just dive into the paper. Like, what's the big deal about this shift?
Yeah, so the paper you reference is work that I had done at AES, and as you know, been there over 10 years. And the paper, and it sits within a larger context of that digitalization journey that we were talking about before. And the paper you reference digs into these technologies called grid enhancing technologies. And so I would say that grid enhancing technologies are maybe a gateway set of tools into the digital environment. One might wonder, well, why should we, bother with digital tools? Hopefully there aren't that many people asking really fundamental questions, but if they are, I think it's good to just pause for a second and recognize that increasingly so, everything we're connecting to the grid is digital, right? So intermittent renewables are often digital behind inverters, right? There's some great thinking by the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the U.S., around the statement that battery storage technology is inherently controllable because it is digital, right? So we're connecting things at the supply side that are digital. And we're also connecting things at the consumption or load side that are also digital. So think about the EVs that we're adopting in the vehicle space. People putting solar systems behind the meter, maybe with, a battery charger that could be operated as part of a virtual power plant. These are all digital systems. Advanced meter infrastructure, right? Those meters are often digital in nature. Your Nest thermostat, not a specific brand endorsement here, but all these thermostats that you have that are internet connected and controllable. So we're on the digital journey. And these technologies referenced in the paper, grid enhancing technologies, are sort of that step 2, right? So if all of the things I just named are the inherent sort of, we want renewable assets, we want EVs, we want conveniences in our home, we live in a modern society, so they happen to be digital. That's step 1. Step 2 is, well, okay, now we need to get smarter about the dynamic grid. Right? We have dynamic sources of consumption, we have dynamic sources of production, and by nature, the lines themselves are also dynamic. They're impacted by weather. As the wind blows stronger, we can get more energy through. As the sun shines stronger and wind is calmer, we have less energy to go through. If there's, or we can carry less energy. If there are trees encroaching, that can actually impact your ability or your desire to put energy through the lines. So getting aware of not just the conditions of the lines, their sort of health, the conditions around the lines in terms of ambient, but also the conditions even a step or two further around vegetation, that situational awareness becomes such a powerful tool in understanding how we manage and match and then also make investment decisions about how we further build out the grid. With that visibility, we really start enabling better operations and better planning.
And I suppose at this particular moment, right, like we're going through this, and again, whatever happens with particular incentives or whatever, you're there in the US that's just gone through an election, things might change come January. I'm still trying to dig in to the new, Sec of Energy, nominee and basically try to understand where he's coming from and some things. But, who knows what's going to happen next year? It doesn't really matter, right? What does seem to matter is the fact that the direction of travel is still pretty clear. And the fact is that however it's done, whether you're in North America or Europe or China or Japan, you're just going to need an awful lot more transmission stuff if insofar as you're, not going to do a complete leapfrog and, which might be necessary in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. But if you're grid reliant already, if you've got a grid that's kind of working, you're probably going to wind up having to invest quite a lot. And I guess for me, what's interesting about the digital aspect, and where I think you were very clear and articulate about how that might come into it, is that we're already starting to see these like really crazy inefficiencies, right? When you plug in a lot of VRES into the grid, I'm here in the UK. The way the contracts for difference are designed. There's £1 billion that are going to be paid out this year for wind turbines that don't move because of the way the market design has been structured. And like, that just drives people crazy.
Oh, for sure.
And I for me, it feels like the lagging part, like we're great about saying like a COP28 last year, let's deploy 3 times the amount of renewables. Fantastic. With very little understanding about what would be required to actually make that happen. So am I right on the right track with that? And like, what role does digital play in helping to smooth that in layman's terms?
Yeah, I definitely take your point, and and would say we have a great opportunity for thinking about timing of investment as well, right? So I am oftentimes these conversations get into sort of binary positions, right? You either invest or you don't. You make things more efficient in lieu of investment. I mean, just even the phrase deferred investment can be a flashpoint for a lot of people in the space, and not surprisingly so. It's a source of economic growth. So maybe picking up on sort of election cycles, right? What we're really talking about when we talk about energy is not just climate and decarbonization, but economic growth and security. And these things are important to all countries out there. So, so how countries achieve their economic growth, their energy security, and hopefully cleaner air in the process. I happen to be on the side of pro renewables, but you don't have to be to care about the grid, as you were saying. So as different countries go about defining how they get to that path, they're going to either deal with infrastructure in place, or they're going to say, well, we have new build altogether. If they're dealing with infrastructure in place, they might have the benefit of saying, how do we make what we have more efficient while also planning for new build, right? So, I go through sort of these very obvious statements, I think, Richard, to make the point of the digital system, the visibility into the grid, and actually the ability to then control the assets, whether at consumption, production, or delivery. That combination, that superpower of visibility plus control allows you to actually start saying, okay, I can control the assets at the end of this feeder, so I can defer investment in that location for now. I'm not saying forever, for now. And then flex that capital that I would have spent without that control and apply it to a more pressing need.
Right.
We do think strategically about capital investment in so many areas of our life, right? In so many areas of economic development. But I would posit to date that many countries that are currently feeling this pressure have built the energy system on a sort of, we must cover all contingencies, we must invest as much as needed, and haven't been as capital constrained as I believe we're about to encounter. So I think that capital constraint may be the valuable crisis that causes us to have to become more aware, make our grid more visible. And that may be step 3 in that transformation to the digital grid, right? So we talked about 1 and 2, now we're on 3, which is no good urgency left unwasted, right? So capital constraint leading to very good economics and monetization equations that say, you know what, investing in that software platform, keeping that data, mining it to find out what adoption cycles are going to be of technologies, how your grid might grow, and how you might then simulate different investment strategies, and then present those investment strategies to your utility commission, to your board of directors, whomever the decision maker is, and justify, we are going to invest in this method, on this timeline, because it achieves those combined goals of safe, reliable, affordable energy.
And I mean, let me just take a step back and let's think about the kinds of things we're talking about, right? So these things that allow you to flex that capital allocation. Like I'm going to ask you to talk about on the generation side, we've had some, or the transmission side, we've had some crazy new stuff like Microsoft buying 3 Mile Island or whatever, or, someone else deciding to take an old disused coal plant because they want the 550 volt, kilovolt line to be able to actually have that because you don't need to build a new one. Stuff like this, or Duke, I think today was announcing that they're going to put a huge battery at the coal plant they're going to retire, this year. So, but specifically on the stuff that's a little more in your wheelhouse, the digital side, in terms of DLR, in terms of other things, like what are the top things? You consider some of them in the writing that you've done, that maybe the audience have heard of but don't really understand. Like, what are the top 3 or 4 things that are not necessarily killer apps, but things that actually can move the needle, make a little bit of difference, allow that kind of flexibility in the capital constrained environment that we're going into?
Absolutely. So probably no surprise from the sort of things I've highlighted right now, but definitely a big fan of dynamic line rating because it does allow you to either make the most of the lines you have in place by sort of visualizing their total carrying capacity capability, or actually also knowing maybe you're running your lines too hot. Maybe you don't have the clearances, or maybe if you just improve a certain part of a line, you actually unlock the total capacity across the line. So there's a lot of visibility that dynamic line rating can provide, both on the safety side as well as that investment strategy that I just mentioned. And then, of course, the sort of out-of-the-box way that people often think about it, which is additional throughput on lines already there. But I don't want to underplay those first 2 of making sure that you're you've got that situational awareness and opportunity for investment strategy. So take that visibility that something like dynamic line rating provides. And then you also improve your toolbox if you add in control mechanisms. So, I've been a big fan of storage as a control mechanism. just because I think, there's a lot of opportunity for buffering of electrons, right? To go back to that communications and telecoms analogy, there's a great opportunity to think about how when you've got a lot of carrying capacity, you could run those wind farms that you were referencing in the UK and then buffer those electrons for a period of time. And certainly as you create longer duration storage, you can buffer them for even longer. But even, less lengthy periods of time, there's a lot of opportunity to strategically place batteries in the system and improve the renewable consumption. Right. And again, if you can visualize and understand the dynamic nature of the grid, then you can make those strategic operational decisions of where to buffer those electrons to maximize renewable consumption and use the assets that you want to have on the system longer term and support the retirement of the assets that you're not trying to keep on for as long. So storage, both as a dual use asset and just in this really sort of buffering and shifting method, I think has a lot of potential, particularly if we are careful about thinking how we strategically place it from a locational basis and start considering maybe we operate storage in a portfolio methodology instead of as one-off assets. And then the third thing that I would pick on my short list is the visualization. Digital twin is the lay way of saying it, but I actually think these visualization technologies, platform technologies that mobilize data and then allow us to do these what-if simulations to support informed decision-making, add in some really good AI, because we've seen that physics-based AI solving is really one of the best AIs that are out there. Physics, because it's math and it's consistent rule and it's global, it lends itself really well to AI. So AI has a great opportunity within this space. So a sophisticated simulation platform like that would be my third tool in the toolbox if I were only allowed three.
Well, I mean, I think we've got I'd love to be able to keep you all day, but I'm conscious that we only have you for a few more minutes. So I want to get to a couple of other topics, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
What's next, right? Because I do think that, we've got this opportunity. We've heard a lot about some of those things. The storage piece, again, I could go on for hours about ask you further deep questions about, like, is it better to put near consumption or generation, et cetera, or is it only constrained by where transmission lines are? I could do all that, but I don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to ask you about that. Basically, what's on the horizon? Like, what should an educated listener to this show be thinking about or following your research to be able to learn more about as things go forward? That's at the edge, right? Because there might be folks who might be listening who might be, in analogous roles, or working on future anticipatory investments, or thinking about capital allocation in, whether it's startups or whatever else. We've had some previous folks on the show coming from VC, from startups and GETS, from, trade associations in Brussels, from all sorts. So where should this, to be smarter, where should they be looking that you're looking? Where the frontier?
Right. Well, I think that I'm going to answer this in two different parts. One is, I think there's going to be a lot of obvious tech in service of step change load. So think about data centers, hyperscalers, all of them. It could even be EV fleet charging systems, right? That those would be more in the distribution system, where the prior are more likely connected to transmission system. I think there are going to be a lot of solutions that need to come up around that. So I just think that segment of customer is going to urgently push the system in the next few years. So I think certainly that's, the media is already covering it. I'm not saying anything brand new on that. But I think sort of the commercial structures, I think the tools are out there, and it's just how you put the tools together to solve the problems of those customers. And if the hyperscalers, in combination with generation providers and utilities, can come up with repeatable, scalable models that pass regulatory muster, that will be a really valuable sort of commercial innovation, less technological, more commercial innovation in the next few years. From the more technological side, certainly, particularly in the US, if we go through a period of responding to that hyperscaler need with more thermal, I really do think that carbon capture becomes an interesting relook. I think it sort of had less support in the last few years, and maybe it accelerates and gets more attention. So as you think about venture capital, maybe that's some place that we work a bit. Again, that sort of idea of no crisis left unwasted, that might be an urgency of the moment. And then personally within the space that I'm really digging into on that digitalization topic, I think we, with AI in hand, are really starting to understand the value of data in a new way, and not just data with a small d, but data as in like big data. So I think that entities that can really hack this idea of how you maintain data in a secure and where customer-related private way, yet still exposing it transparently to foster innovation at scale, and application of AI, I think that's going to be a really important near-term step that occurs. So there's some entities that are looking at statistically relevant, anonymized synthetic data. Again, I'm not sure if that's an investment strategy or if that's open source. It might be more within the open source community. But I think that would be a transformative solution to come up with, because once that sort of synthetic data were available, you could then expose to decision makers, whether those were regulators, PUCs, the people who are approving those investments that we were talking about. You can then say, look at this particular case that I'm asking you to invest in, and you can repeat the analysis. You don't have to trust me. You can verify for yourself. And the energy system is a system that is full of people who like to kick the tires, and that data would allow people to kick the tires on decisions. And I think that could accelerate transformation. So I'd be really excited to see innovations there too.
Well, I think that'll definitely be falling on welcoming ears here in the UK with some folks in the Startup Coalition. I know we're very passionate about this. And I think, again, because having worked in, for my sins, digital advertising at one point, I think that there's so much thought and regulation and kind of things that have gone into this over the last few years. People have thought a lot more about oh, what happens if I have a cookie on my website and I have to accept cookies in GDPR here in Europe and blah, blah, blah. As opposed to okay, the reason that people started using that in the first place is that I'm old enough to remember when we referred to this as data exhaust. And the idea this first party data, didn't really have a lot of value. And second party data, you do it over here, third party data, well, you can monetize that in different ways. And then you get the advertising tech, the ad tech world that we've, now living in this dystopic reality of a few years later. So I guess are there other models that you would, again, you mentioned open source versus other ones. People might be concerned about security. We haven't really talked about that. Because the more you digitalize something, I was having a conversation with someone in cybersecurity in a kind of grid supplier earlier today, where this kind of came up. So how can we extend that further? Because I love the data piece. I think there's so much more to be done there. So maybe say more about that before we move on to our final two questions.
Sure. I think in the data piece, what you started to describe reminded me of platform thinking, right? It's this idea that you may start with either a transactional platform or, as a more standard linear value chain approach. But then as you bring in and reveal the value of data, you start seeing sort of externalities or positive opportunities that manifest for monetization. And I think that that's a really interesting way of thinking about how the investments in something as large as a digital twin can start providing economic value. Not to go too far down the path, but I do think that there's a good question about the different sources of capital to fund a creation of sort of a digital twin of the grid. I think there are a lot of roles to play, and there are a lot of companies that are out there recognizing that they may have a role, and that's very exciting. So I'm hopeful that a lot of people will lean in, but I think universally, regardless of the source of capital or the monetization strategy, data has that big opportunity for unlock. So your point is well taken around security, but many people who think about the internet and the federated nature of the internet, or blockchain as another sort of talking point, will recognize that once you have digital capabilities around that system, including sort of that federation, the standards and protocols, that the system can actually start doing its own cybersecurity to some degree. where if you have limited digital footprint, the surface for cyber attack is very specific and focused and presents its own sorts of challenges, where when you have sort of the supporting structures that we see in the internet, it's hard to have a single failure point. So it's not to say that we don't need cybersecurity, but I think that as we lean into the digital system and we know how to build digital systems, right, we'll be able to bring in those cyber structures with which we're quite familiar and continue the fight. I mean, anyone who works in an energy system recognizes that physical infrastructure is something we have to protect as well. So this cybersecurity, customer privacy, all of those things exist in the current energy system and will continue to persist in the digital system. We'll just have more tools in our toolbox.
Well, it sounds like that somebody with that telecoms background that's too. I lived certainly through. I think a bit older than you. Lived through the time where telecom systems, the core signaling network, were still NatSec kind of assets and had a whole bunch of laws that don't really exist anymore. And we don't really think about it as much in that way. So yeah, there we go. So there you go. If you're looking to talk to somebody who's got a little bit of nous on this, then Alexina is the person for you. So penultimate question. You're in a room, you're at WEF, right? In January, you're in Davos. You got a bunch of the world's regulators, policymakers, the technology providers and utilities in the one room. What is the one thing you want them to remember from what you think they should do?
I'd say that my current soapbox point would really be around that that investment decision making. I feel a great sense of urgency and also recognize that we've got huge investments from a global perspective ahead of us. And we're under such a period of massive change that there's no way we're going to achieve this without spending massive amounts of money. But I aspired to the idea that everyone can benefit from the transition and that we're not going to make a transition where we leave a lot of people in the loser seat. And that requires people coming to the table together and finding solutions at a collaborative sort of system level. And I found that in bringing people of different objectives to a shared outcome, information that is trusted and transparent and objective is one of the best tools in that transformation. So I think this visibility and the ability for people to kick tires on information, to show, don't tell, is probably going to be one of the biggest cultural unlocks and points for true collaboration. So I think it's a worthy investment early on so that our later investments can be strategic, well-informed, and building the things we need when we need them, not just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Love it. And then final question, as we ask anybody of your eminence who comes on this show, 3 things that have influenced you, we call them catalysts, over the years that shaped your desire to work in this space, maybe changed how you thought about climate. Over to you.
Yeah. So as you gave me a clue that I was going to need to talk about this, so I dug deep and thought hard. And came up with 2 books and a life experience. So the first book is called Difficult Conversations. And I think the subtitle is something like How to Have the Conversations That Matter Most. So maybe in light of my last answer to you, it's no surprise that I looked to that book. But it was one that I came across when I was in consulting at the beginning of my career. And it really helped me get some frameworks in my mind around how to bring divergent groups together to that shared objective and embrace change. So while it's an older book out there, I think the lessons in it are quite useful, and I commend it forward. From a life experience perspective, I actually felt that the bar exam, which is, the process for becoming, a barred attorney, so someone who can practice law, was really something that I often refer to as a transformational moment for me. And the reason I say that is the legal system is a system of rewards and punishments for behaviors, right? Those can be economic behaviors, those can be personal behaviors. But, every country sits down and says, what are we going to reward? What are we going to punish? And put it into a legal system. And that that system runs through every sort of practice of law or every sort of discipline within the law. And when you sit down for the bar exam, at least in the US, you end up touching on all these different areas of practice in the law. And it became apparent for me that I could see that thread, that sort of commonality of rewards and checks and balances that really underpinned our value system. So as I think about climate, as I think about sustainability, we come to this either sort of as that passion around those sustainable climate-related outcomes, or we might come to it around the economic growth and energy security, or maybe all of those matter to us. But they are systems of value that we ascribe that underpin all these decisions we make. So I think there's value in understanding and recognizing that what we value as people really do influence these difficult conversations we're having. And so that's my second. And then trying to keep this not too esoteric and long. The third thing that I would put out there is another book called Understanding Comics. And that's by a fellow named Scott McCloud. And I read this as a very young person. And there was a particular chapter, chapter 7, for anyone who picks it up, that sort of talks about how you communicate purpose and the structure and method of communicating purpose. And that really hit me as a young person. Did I have a specific message I needed to communicate? Was there a method in which I wanted to communicate? And it really helped me reflect early on about my purpose and how I was going to bring it to the world.
That's amazing. I mean, I gotta ask, sorry, but like, were comics and graphic novels a big part of your life growing up?
I was definitely a big fan, read all of the Watchmen series. Alan Moore was a big, a big set of fantastically researched graphic novels. I definitely am very much into art. And so the combination of intellectual curiosity about often historic events or potential fictional, what if future events combined with visual cues was definitely in my wheelhouse. So yes.
Well, amazing. I mean, next time you're in the UK, you have to come over. We'll get a bunch of people who've been on the show to dinner. And that's a perspective I think about half of our previous guests would find to be exactly right on. And the other half be like, what? And therefore, why would be a good chat. So last bonus question, anything you want to plug, or where can people follow you to keep up with your work?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned Blue Sky at the beginning. I'm beginning a presence there, I suppose, but my main and most direct connection point is LinkedIn. So there aren't too many of me out there as Alexina Jackson, which I know you'll spell on the website. So if this conversation has caused anyone to get in touch, and want to dig in further, I welcome connecting there.
Well, we'll put those coordinates in the show notes for sure. So no matter how people are experiencing this, they will find that. Alexina Jackson, energy guru-ess, an influencer.
Love it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. This has been great, Richard.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
That's probably all my team. There's no I in it, I bring in all my team. Gas when they saw my team. Even the bouncers bounce when they saw my team. Who do you wanna holler, who do you wanna never know? Don't be a sheep when you can be the GOAT. Greatest of all time and you never know. Don't show up to my show if you've got no energy.
If you liked this conversation, please share it and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like an ad-free version of this podcast, consider becoming a paid subscriber at wickedproblems.earth. You'll also get our newsletter, all our show notes, member-only goodies, and you'll be supporting media that wants to tell the stories at the frontier of climate tech, the place where people and politics, technology and capital meet and shape the future. And whether it's one you'd want to live in. Wicked Problems is written and edited by Richard Delavan. Production assistance was provided by me, Theodore Delavan. Wicked Problems, Climate Tech Conversations, is a production of Wicked Problems Limited. Thanks again for listening.
Energy.